You know, John Cleese, I have this image of a doctor in a small seaside town of England delivering a child, holding it up by its feet, spanking its behind, and instead of its crying, there's this roaring laughter. That's what I see you as a child. Now, I know you don't remember that day.
It's a funny image.
But did you come through the world laughing at it, so to speak?
No, I don't think so. I think the truth is that I found it when I was very young extremely difficult. I'm being straight now.
Yeah, sure.
And I think in a way the circumstances of my very early childhood were, for reasons I can't go into in detail, so difficult that if I hadn't developed a sense of humor, it would really have got the better of me.
And you developed that sense of humor relatively early?
I think so, yes. I mean, I can see my father's humor in my humor. But if I look at what I've been laughing at over the years, an incredible amount of it is laughing at anger, particularly sort of ineffectual anger like Basil Fawlty's, and also laughing inordinately at complete non-communication. I mean, the first time I ever heard an English guy called Stanley Unwin, who was giving a speech, and he said, "The carts and the tempertones merk the group poses and overcloth. Murgle chooses this to be discussed upon a part of Isaac Cruz to get it," and I just died. And I went straight off and wrote that, and then learned it by heart. So and that was 35 years ago. So it seems to me I've always been trying, I'll let you speak later. It seems to me I've always been trying to laugh at anger and failure of communication. And I think those are the two things that ultimately, maybe not now, used to terrify me more than anything. So I try to diminish them. Shut up. I try to diminish them by laughing at them. Now I finished.
Thank you, sir. The John Cleese show.
No,
no, please stay.
Fine.
You know, I'm going to go back to your childhood for just a bit because I understand. I recall that you said you were at 12, 6 feet tall. Mm-hmm. That must have been a rather awkward time.
It was awkward because there's nothing you want to do as a kid more than be able to fade into the background some of the times, you know. And when you're 6 foot and you're taller than everyone in the school, including the masters, you're that much taller than the headmaster, and he was big. There's no fading into the back.
And still you allowed yourself to be bullied.
Yes. Well,
Now,
that's my trouble with anger. Because you see, everybody's uncomfortable about this emotion, particularly the British, who can't handle anger at all. They're just like Basil. You know, they're all white and spiteful, we call.
Margaret Thatcher does a good job.
She does, but that's all she can do. That's the full gamut of her emotions. A to B is irritation, annoyance, anger, and fury. You know, and she brings the changes between those four.
But the average Britisher doesn't?
Yes, the average, I mean, here's a story about the British I think is very funny. I'd been in California about 3 months, and I went out to lunch, and there was another Brit on the lunch table. And he wanted, I watched him, he wanted the salt. He didn't know how to ask for the salt, you see. So he sat there, and an American would have said, "Pass me the salt." Or maybe, "Would you pass me the salt?" Or "Pass me the salt, please." He sat there, and finally somebody caught his eye, and he said, "Sorry." Now the English are so terrified of anger, because like the Japanese, we live in a tiny little island with everybody crammed together. There's only 2 places in the world that are more crowded than the UK. I think it's Hong Kong and Holland. That we've had to devise this very formal social code, because when people are crammed together, they're much more likely to bump into each other and get angry, you see? That's what I love about America, especially Dallas, Texas, this space. Everybody has space, so they're more relaxed and open. So the English get very inhibited. Instead of just being inhibited in their anger, they finish up not being able to say anything that sounds at all direct. You know, they don't say, "Would you pass me the salt?" They say, "Sorry," or they say, "Awfully sorry, but I wonder if you could possibly see your way clear, if it's not inconvenient at all, at a moment, you know, when it doesn't interrupt what you're actually up to possibly transferring salt, not necessarily to me, but certainly in a direction which would diminish the distance between myself, if that's all right by you, but if it's, you know what I mean?"
I know what you mean.
So we have no anger, and it gets suppressed so much we can't even be assertive in an ordinary.
Boy, and you use humor to offset your anger. You must have been very angry. Your fear of
I was very angry, and I was also very angry, and I couldn't express it, so that I was terrified of it. Terrified of my own anger and other people's. And I think that that's why I've made so many jokes about it.
You know, I'm sure that our audience would be very surprised to know about this business venture you're engaged in right now of teaching business management through video. Because I'm sure they've got to say, the guy who was the hotel manager in Faulty Towers?
That's the trouble about being in show business. They say, not only is he one of Britain's leading actors, he also likes reading. God, this is a Renaissance man. You'll tell me next he does some gardening. He does. Oh! Give him a Nobel Prize. You know, the idea in show business, if you do one thing, it is absolutely astounding. If you also drive a car or cook yourself pasta, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because we do have this idea of you. I mean, because I know that at Cambridge you didn't study writing or drama. I mean,
no,
you did
I did law. I did science at school and then law. So I'm about as kind of boring as it's possible to be, so far as my background's concerned, and personally, unfortunately.
I hate to keep stepping on your line, but
there's so many of them. It's hard not to.
It amazes me that you're so prolific as a writer.
But I'm not.
But
now look, Bob Ray, I'm really not. If you look at how much I've done since, say, the end of Python, it's quite surprisingly little. But the luck is, because I work so hard at things like Wanda, which I'm very proud of, that screenplay, 13 drafts. It used to take us 6 weeks to write an episode of Faulty Towers. These video arts training films I make, the amount of care that goes into them is greater than the amount of care that goes into the average half-hour on American television. So, shh, quiet, getting to the point, slowly, but eventually. The point is that these small number of shows that I make work well, so people remember them and think I've done a lot. But since end of Python, I've done 3 Python films, 12 Faulty Towers, a book, Family How to Survive Them, a lot of training films, admittedly, maybe 25, 30 training films, and Wanda. Now, that's not a great deal for 17 years.
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot. I mean, it appears to be
maybe it's a lot by your standards, but...
Oh, well, you know, I know the average person out there is saying it just comes natural to you. It's so easy for you, and yet 6 weeks writing an episode.
If they want to say one thing to anybody listening, it is that my stuff works because of the time I put in it. I don't mean I don't have talent, sure, but the reason that Wanda is really such a good film, and I think it is that we did 13 drafts on the script, and then we showed it to 6 audiences in the UK and 6 audiences in America, and after every showing we went back to the film and re-edited it in the light of the audience response. And we showed it to the audience and went back, re-edited it. Now, if you work that hard, you really have a good chance of getting it right. And the amazing thing in our business is how few people really take that kind of care.
And it paid off because you got an Academy Award nomination for writing this.
For writing it, and Kevin, of course, got the Best Supporting Actor. And the best thing of all was that the director, who was an old friend of mine, who was 77 years of age during the shooting of the film, he also got an Academy nomination, which I think was the proudest moment of his life, because he'd been nominated in something like 1952.
It's an excellent film, but I heard you tell an audience today that creativity is not talent.
No, I'm actually...
And not to ask you to give the speech, but what is it? What is it then?
I've always thought that it's a kind of mood, and some people know how to get into this mood, and it's as though we're all naturally creative, but as a lot of educationalists will tell you, we kind of crush it out of kids, and they lose the natural mode of being playful or creative. Because you see kids play, see how little animals play, watch cats play, you know? I've got 5 cats, and they make me laugh so much when they're playing, because they're just playing. Now, what happens is when we leave that early stage of our life, we get so purposeful, you know, tunnel vision, got to get this done, got to get that done. We lose the ability just to sit and speculate and play and have fun with things, and that's all that creativity is.
And I heard you say that one of your colleagues on Monty Python, whom you considered more talented, was actually less creative.
Yeah. This guy is more talented than I am. He's not as good an actor, but he's a great guy for thinking up funny lines and funny ideas. He's wonderful. But I noticed that in his writing, he didn't produce stuff that was as original as I did. And I realized after a time it was because if at 4:30 he had a problem he hadn't solved, he got an idea at 4:50, that wasn't that original, but was okay. He finished. 5:05, he'd finished. He had a glass of wine in his hand. I was sitting there 4:30. I have the same idea. I think, it's not quite good enough. It's not, you know. So I sit there till 10 to 7. My wife's shouting, "Come on, we have to go out to dinner in 15 minutes." I say, yeah, you know. I sit all through dinner, kind of preoccupied with this damn problem because I haven't solved it. I come home in the evening and she says, "You know, where were you?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about this thing. I'm sorry, you know." Then I sit down the next morning at my desk, and after 5 minutes, this idea comes from nowhere. Because I put in all the thinking time. It's what I call a reward from your unconscious. And it's great, because I have a more original idea. Of course, he has a much better life than I do. You know, he enjoys his life, but I'm more creative.
You know, let me ask you this, because in watching your training films, which I sense, I mean, and you can tell have a lot of humor in them.
Yeah,
I don't consider it comedy. Is there a difference in the definition of comedy and humor?
Oh, and I think that's one of those things. It just depends on how everybody uses the words, and I don't think there's an agreement on it. But I know what you mean. There are lots of different types of humor, and as far as I'm concerned, it would be completely inappropriate to use Monty Python humor in almost any training film I can think of, because training films, the humor comes in showing people, first of all, how not to do it. Then, of course, you've got to show them how to do it. But it's such a powerful message if they see the wrong way of doing it and they hear people around them laughing at it. It's amazing how powerful that message is, but that only works if you're doing what I call observational humor. If the humor is to do with the fact that people recognize the quite subtle point that you're making about the behavior. If you use wild humor, it just wouldn't work in a training film.
I can tell you from my own experience that I've gone to Harvard Training School to get a refresher course in business. I've gone to the University of North Carolina to get a refresher course. I never learned as much as I learned in watching 4 of your tapes.
Really? That's great.
It's excellent. I mean, that's a compliment to you.
Well,
because
it's
you make it
really
work.
nice, because you see, I taught for 2 years. Before I went to Cambridge, I taught. And I discovered that if you haven't got it really clear up there, when the kids start asking questions, you look such a fool. So that we never, in video art, start committing anything, you know, to celluloid, or nowadays to tape, until we're absolutely sure we've got those lessons worked out. And many times, we've been scheduled to shoot on Monday, and we've said on Wednesday, the script's not clear. And we pull the plug, cancel everyone, costs a bit of money. But it does mean that almost every time we've made a film, the lessons are clear. And there's so much bad teaching, Bob Ray.
Yes.
Schools, universities, there's so many people teaching who are not clear. And the trouble is the students blame themselves. You read something, you think, I'm too stupid to get this. 90% of the time, the guy is not good at putting it across clearly.
Back to humor just a little bit. You've said that humor should not hurt. I think you've said that.
It's a very difficult question. I mean, I don't think you want to hurt anyone. At the same time, one of the problems in America is you have so many protest groups that you begin to wonder whether you can make any jokes at all. And I mean, when I'd made Wanda, we always used to get this question about how do the stutterers feel about it. Now, several of my friends stutter, Robin Skinner, Jonathan Miller, 2 other friends and other. They thought it was hysterical. And I don't think, with a few exceptions, very few, that many of the stutterers bothered. In fact, many of them wrote to the Stutterers magazine saying it was great to see someone up there on the screen stuttering, because they're usually ignored, who was actually someone that the audience adored, Michael Palin.
Right.
You know, the trouble about Michael Palin, if you had him playing Hitler, everyone would adore him. You know? So I didn't feel that that was unfair, but you always got this question from the media. Mr. Cleese, have the stutterers protested? And the only way I could deal with it is saying, yeah. I said they have, and we've had a lot of letters from the League of Stupid People about the way that Kevin Kline portrayed Otto, who was very stupid. Right. And I said we've had a lot of letters from the National Association of Manipulative Women complaining about Jamie Lee Curtis's portrait, saying this is just what gives manipulative women a bad name. You see what I mean? Where do you stop?
Well, I wanted to get to that point because, I mean, sitting here at this station with all the British comedies that we have had complaints that the British comedies, including A Faulty Tower, it's very sexist. On occasion, even racist, perhaps, anti-religious, you know, or ordained religion, so to speak.
Yeah.
How do you answer that argument?
Well, I would very happily take each one. I don't know if I can say generally, except to say that all humor that I've ever analyzed has got a critical edge to it. I don't know a joke that doesn't in some way criticize someone or some attitude. I suppose maybe there are some puns that don't really have a critical meaning underlying them. But almost every other kind of meme, I think that we laugh, and I got this from a French philosopher called Bergson, when our behavior becomes inappropriate because it's inflexible, like Basil, who is angry no matter what happens. Now, it's all right to be angry. I mean, Christ was angry, but the whole point about Christ, you can't laugh at him because the guy was perfect. His flexibility was so perfect that whatever happened to him, he responded appropriately. Now, what's funny about pompous people is they've got an act on that isn't appropriate to the reality around them. And that's why we laugh. For example, obsessional people is a particularly good example because they're not flexible. They are caught in an obsession, and so they're always behaving inappropriately. So if you make jokes about people like this, if you write a character of this kind, it's implicitly criticizing this character for being inflexible. So anything that you criticize, that you make a joke about, is a criticism.
And you know, there are some people who thought you actually were laughing at Christ in one film.
Yeah, well, this is the problem.
They didn't catch. I mean, in Search of the Holy Grail.
Yeah, Life of Brian. Life of Brian.
Life of Brian.
Because we had to have a figure like a religious leader. In this case, we chose to make it like Christ and set it in the Holy Land, in order to make fun of the way in which people followed him. Now, that's a legitimate target. You don't have to make fun of Muhammad or Buddha or Christ, but it's legitimate to make fun of the way people follow these guys, because half the people who call themselves religious are doing things that if Christ or Muhammad or Buddha observed, they would say, I'm sorry, well, you've missed the point.
That cross scene is just incredible, and yet I know what you're talking about because I have a friend who says, just imagine if Jesus had been electrocuted. We'd all be wearing little electric chairs around our neck. You know, I mean,
well, that's the point. I mean, the point was that in those days, Romans executed people by crucifying them. If you look at that wonderful film Spartacus by Stanley Kubrick, at the end, as you say, they're not lined up against a wall and shot. Right. So what we were doing by then is we were trying to get people to laugh at the idea of death, not at pain. You can laugh at pain if you have the right perspective, you know, in terms of eternal values. But you can actually laugh at life. And there's a lot of lines in that last song which are a wonderful way of just saying, you know, we start as dust and we finish as dust, and that's the deal. Why get so upset about it? You know, that's what you get.
But you started out writing, I think, for BBC Radio.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, obviously, aside from the visual, is there a major difference in writing for radio and writing for...
lovely. I mean, acting for radio...
Is it easier?
Well, for a start, acting on radio, you don't have to shave. You don't have to know your lines. The only trouble is you get paid 72p a program, you know. I mean, writing for it is hugely different. I think it's a very, very good training because in some ways, everything that is essential to the comedy has got to be put down on the paper in words, and that's a huge discipline. And because in Python, if you took any Python sketch, there's so much information that's relevant to the jokes in that first shot. And everything on radio has got to be established. That's very hard work.
And yet you're so visual, you're so physical.
Well, I'm not very visual. I learned to be visual. I have a good sense of rhythm. I have a good sense of movement. You know, I have a very good... It's because I used to play a lot of games. And comedy timing is a lot like sports.
I mean, I don't want to disagree with you. I mean, you know how you are, but even before we started taping the show, you said this chair is too small.
Well, it's because I'm uncomfortable, not because I've got a great... I mean, look at this chair. Right? Now, I once said to somebody, why is all furniture too small? And they said, because all the furniture that you buy anywhere in America or Europe is based on the size of furniture at the end of the 18th century. Now, back in 1780, people were not very big, and here we all are now. You know, we should be sitting there, and we're all sitting like this. Nobody does anything about it. Why don't you do anything about it?
I'd like to play a little game with you. You said we should play, and I know what some things you might say and come to mind when I give these names to you. I want to give you some names, and in one sentence or two.
Word association.
Yeah, tell me
not
what
therapy, is it?
Yeah,
because I had a lot of therapy. I don't want any.
You have had a lot of therapy. I was going to. I'm not going to talk much about that, but I want to get to that. Let's play this little therapeutic game.
I've had so much therapy. I told my therapist I'm getting bored with it, and she said that's a very healthy reaction.
Yeah, and you went to therapy relatively late in life, didn't you?
Yeah, well, really, originally because my first marriage went wrong. So my now ex-wife and I went for 3.5 years to see Robin Skinner, and that was a great experience because although we finished up separately, we have a very good friendship and relationship, and somehow his presence facilitated that separation. I don't think divorce is such a disaster. I know we're all supposed to go, oh, there's an awful lot of it, you know. And my experience is that it's okay. You can get on. You can suddenly realize that a marriage has worked for so long and doesn't work anymore. And afterwards, you can have a good relationship. And if you can work out a good relationship with your ex-spouse, then the kids can be fine.
And how are the kids?
Mine?
Did you have any?
Oh, the best.
And they came through the ordeal okay?
Yeah, I've got a 19-year-old who was definitely handicapped at one stage because when we were splitting up, she it upset her too much. But that was because the time I split up the first time was very painful, and I moved back in and moved out and moved back in and out about 6 times. And it was the uncertainty. Now, when I got divorced the second time, which was only 2 or 3 years ago, it was done very simply and quickly and with full agreement on both sides. And I don't think my little daughter's been affected at all. And in fact, you see, they get some very strange reactions. I mean, Robin Skinner came once, it might have even been to Dallas, I can't remember, and he was talking to a group of girls, who half of them from broken homes and half not. And the ones who were with the stable homes said most extraordinary things to him, like, it's sort of, they have a very interesting life having 2 homes to live in. So it's like any human predicament. You can take a good way out of it or a bad way out of it, The great mistake is to think if you have a bad time at some stage of your childhood, you're going to turn out with problems. You look at half the most successful people, artistically, business-wise, politically, they've had the same problems. And it's a question of how you deal with problems. Everybody has problems.
And now you're involved and very happy with someone else.
Yeah,
right?
That's right, from Texas.
And has a double name.
One of those ridiculous double names like, yeah.
Speaking of names, let me get back to my
yes.
word association. Okay, I'm going to throw these out, and you just tell me what comes to mind quickly. Woody Allen.
Funny. That was good, wasn't it? It just came out like a shot.
Alfred Hitchcock.
Rope. Now, I happen to be reading a biography about Hitchcock at the moment, Alfred Hitchcock at the moment. And the most extraordinary thing that's coming out of it is his absolute fascination with strangulation. The number of people who are strangled in his movie is astounding. But instead of saying strangle, I said rope, which is the name of one of his movies.
Right.
It's funny.
Great reply. You've spoken to her before, but let me throw it out again. Margaret Thatcher.
Cross. Furious.
Oh.
Furious. As the Americans say, mad.
What about W.C. Fields?
Genius. Juggler. Do you know the extraordinary thing about him, he could juggle with things of different weights, which is very, very difficult. And he used to juggle a lot in his hotel room. Do you know why? Because he wanted to have an excuse to drink, and he liked to work up a thirst. But a total genius, that man. I think, in a way, almost the most interesting comic America ever produced. But, of course, like a lot of comics, a horrible person, I'm afraid.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He was really, really not a nice man, I think.
You studied these people that you admire, don't you?
To some extent, yes. I mean, Fields, I think I've studied as much as anyone, because I think the stuff that he does is absolutely astounding. There are just the occasional comic who does stuff and you don't know how he does it, and that is remarkable.
Well, I mean, that's also a description of you, and I've heard the term genius applied to you. Do you accept it well? You wear it well?
I don't think so, unless you take that definition of G.B. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, said something like it's an infinite capacity for detail.
Well, and
yeah, which is much more. But the people
but making it look as if you didn't.
Oh yeah,
have
that's
this
important. That's right. Yes, I remember seeing it. It was a marvellous thing in a play many years ago, Beau Brummel. There was a play about this great English dandy. And he came down, he said to someone, "How is my cravat?" And they said, "It's perfect. It looks as if you spent an hour and a half tying it." He said, "No, no, it's got to look as if I just tied it right."
Right. Go back to another name, George Bush.
Like him.
You do.
Yeah, very few politicians I like. But I just always liked him.
Well, Dan Quayle.
Don't really know him, but he seems a bit silly.
Just a bit?
Well, I can't figure out. He came to somebody told me he came and made a very good speech here 2 weeks ago. And the fact is, people do grow. You know, people do get better. People do learn if they're open to learning. But I think it was a bit of a shock, and I think George made a mistake there. And I think he didn't want to admit it.
I think you should know, too, in case you didn't, that at the same time you were speaking in Dallas today, the president was speaking in another hotel, and I'm glad that I was at your speech. I mean, you know, no reflection on him, but I think I know what he was saying.
I like the way he handles things. I like the way he talks to people and consults. It's all my liking about communication and, you know, being as open as you can with people. I think he impresses me, let's put it like that. And I've got to say, comparing your last 5 or 6 presidents with your first 5 or 6 presidents does not indicate we're making much progress. I mean, you're the only country, you're the only country ever to have been started by intellectuals. But the 6 or 8 people who were your first presidents were the most astounding people when you compare them with the last lot.
I must say that
Not that ours are any better. Don't think I'm saying that. I mean, I like Macmillan, but I can't say I much like anyone since. They were all not deeply impressive human beings.
Yeah. One last name, because he's on all of our minds today, Saddam Hussein.
It's very easy just to say a lunatic. I don't think in an appalling way he is the most important element here. I think, I'm convinced that you have to link everything up. You can't just cut things apart. Now, I understand politically and militarily why the Americans, the British and so forth are saying you can't connect the rest of the Middle East. I mean, you can't have it completely separate. You can't keep Kuwait separate from Israel. But I think unless you take the whole thing together and begin to sort it all out, you're going to have problems forever till you do connect it all together. So my feeling is that the weakness on our side is not a moral weakness, but it is a slight moral weakness. We have ignored things in the Middle East that we should have, Israel and Palestinian, that we should have been putting right. And what we've ignored there, the chickens are beginning to come home to roost in the sense that there's support for Saddam Hussein, which he doesn't deserve.
Right.
And I think we've got to link it all and start working on it. And that means, I think, at times being tougher with Israel than the Americans have been.
That's a tough statement.
I know. It's going to make me very unpopular, but I genuinely believe it. I think that they have to be tougher with certain aspects of Israeli policy. And it's not that I'm not totally sympathetic. I mean, Israel, for decades, was under threat of being wiped out. But we can't go back to history the whole time. That's like Northern Ireland. You know, people just talk about what happened. And everybody says, oh, well, the only reason we behave badly is that they behaved badly before us. Well, if you say that, you just go on forever.
You know, I have admired you for a long time.
Not long enough.
And I have a sense that I know what makes you laugh. What makes a John Cleese cry, if anything?
Well, I'll tell you that. Because it may surprise people, but through my interest in therapy, I became quite friendly with a lot of people in England who do family therapy. In fact, I was very pleased. In the middle of this year, I came to Philadelphia with Robin Skinner, and we both spoke at the American Family Therapy Association conference. And because they knew I had a serious interest, they used to let me watch tapes of families in treatment. This was partly because I was making a film for them to raise funds. And we actually couldn't use the scenes of the real families, but we took extracts from the scenes and scripted them and had them replayed for the purpose of our fundraising film by families of therapists and the therapists themselves. They reenacted the scenes. So I had to watch a lot of these families, and I found two very strange and unpredictable things, that when I watched these families, even when they were suffering, occasionally, to my surprise, I would be amused because I realized how inflexible they were. And I would suddenly think, God, they're caught in this extraordinary pattern of repeating the same behavior no matter how inappropriate it is. And that, I was tipped off for that because I would find it funny. I'd almost be shocked at the fact that I found it funny. And then I discovered that the moments when I was moved, deeply moved, was when something changed. When suddenly somebody did something that they'd never done before. You saw this incredible possibility that they were getting free from what had been destroying their lives and moving somewhere new. And I suddenly thought this word, emotion, it's Latin, it means movement out of. So I think I feel that kind of emotion when I see somebody moving out of a pattern that's no use to them anymore into a new pattern. It's surprising, isn't it?
It is surprising. But I thank you for sharing it with us, and John Cleese, thank you for making us laugh. Appreciate it.
Sorry you interrupted me so much. Never.
What I love after the news is